Hello and welcome to Pat O'Keefe's World of Curiosities, and tonight's feature is Zeea and Pat's Witchy Wisdom. Zeea, what do we have on the docket tonight?
Well, hey everybody, thank you for tuning in again. So this is going to be part two of our animals episode. We're going to talk about animals and magic. So we're going to talk a little bit about our pets, our personal familiars, ways that we can use them in our magic, and then we're going to talk about power or totem spirit animals, and also skinwalkers. So that's going to be pretty interesting, I think. So, first of all, we love our animals, especially our pets, and um, yeah, so they are known as our familiars. Sometimes we might call them that. And there's spells that we can do and ways that we can use their fur or hair or whiskers to protect them. And, these are things that, we obviously do not harm the animals or take things from them. It's just stuff that they've naturally dropped that we can use in their protection spells for them. Um, so, what are some things that you would do, Pat?
As in spells? Well, one of the things I've got right here is cat claws right here. And if you have something that you want to be tenacious about, hanging on like a cat might on a screen door, it is a good thing to have. You can use really anything that your cat disposes of naturally, like his or her fur or her whiskers. And when you're dealing with animals in magic, really just think about the attributes of the animal, right? If you want something in balance, a cat is a good animal to look at because they are so balanced, right? They're also considered like the crow or the raven, an animal that walks between the worlds. So there's that too. If you're wanting to get closer to the other side, say you're doing mediumship work, or if you are calling to an ancestor, a cat is an excellent pet to have. And really, all you have to do with a cat is hold it and receive that energy. And as you know, cats show their love by purring because it's at a frequency that is very healing. It can actually help heal broken bones. So, there's just so many things you can do if you're out and you find a say a feather. You can use that feather, bring it back and use it, if you do use sage. I don't. I happen to use salt water is what I use for cleansing. But now I will tell you, in some indigenous Indians, their culture, it is considered a very bad thing to bring a like a owl feather, well, any kind of feather home, because that can be someone who has sent bad juju, so to speak, to you or is trying to hex you. So don't pick up a feather. So, there's just so many things. What about you?
So if we can make, like, for our pets specifically, can make like little talismans for their collars so they won't roam, or and they'll be safe. And so this was the kind of thing I just wanted to mention that I found in a Pennsylvania Dutch German superstition book. So it's nothing that we would do today or want to do today or think that it was even really necessary anymore, but I just thought it was kind of interesting. It said, put some of your blood in your dog's foods and they will never stray from you and always be loyal. I was like, I think we can treat the dog nicely and it will stay with us. We don't have to do things like that. But that's just something I found that was interesting. There's also some things like involving, like, using a bat for gambling. But I think, like how you mentioned before, we can just use the energy and intention of that animal and infuse these different objects with it for our magical workings. We don't actually have to use even parts of that animal, but just kind of like the spirit and intention of that we can put into it. Um, but like, speaking of like different spirit animals, that's the thing that we need to talk about next. So for me, my main one, I love cats. I got a cat skull necklace. It's not a real skull, it's just a replica. And I have a bee charm here. And And then I liked skunks is one of my main ones, and I've got my white streaks in my hair. But skunks can represent boundaries, protection. Don't, start nothing and they won't be nothing kind of energy. They have strong boundaries and protect themselves, but they don't necessarily, they're not necessarily ferocious and harming, other animals and stuff. But and they're also kind of about balance because the black and white, it's kind of duality and balance, I feel. And they're resourceful as well because if you think about it, they're scavenger animals, so they have to use what's at their disposal to, survive. What's some of your power animals?
One of my favorite, before we go on, I just want to mention, I did forget to mention that cat's claws also, just like a cat uses them for defense and protection, you can also use them in that type of magic. But the owl is my power animal, and some people would say spirit animal, and I do, and I know the connection supposedly to colonialism, et cetera, but I really feel it is in the spirit realm, and I feel that we lose so much if we deny ourselves that descriptor of this kind of energy because it's very powerful in many, many practitioners' lives. But the owl is interesting. Athena originally had supposedly the crow was her spirit animal, if you will, her connection to the animal world. And the crow was just so irritating. She said, "Okay, I've got to get myself another partner, right? I need another sidekick. This crow is driving me nuts." And if you know anything about crows, they can be very excitable. They can, bounce from foot to foot, and they can get excited about things. They have real personalities. But she wanted something more serious, more calm. And she was so impressed with the owl. And she saw that it equated to like wisdom and a wisdom that goes deeper than what we call in the mountains learning or book learning, right? This is the wisdom of the universe. Now, in Native American cultures, the owl is often associated with prophecy and divination. So there's that connection to the other world. And, the Hopi tribe equated the burrowing owl with their god of death. And because it came from the ground, it was also connected very closely with earth, this whole idea of earth. The Inuits, I love this story. The Inuits have a story about the owl and how the raven received its dark, dark coat. So, the owl and the raven created a beautiful dress for the owl. The snowy owl, by the way, is what we're talking about. And the dress was made of both white and black feathers. Well, the owl created a beautiful white dress made of feathers for the raven. And the raven was so excited, like ravens tend to do. It got real nervous. It started bouncing around and just, one foot to the other and got hyper. And it was too much. It was too much for the snowy owl. So the snowy owl picked up a pot of cooking oil and threw it on the raven. And according to the Inuits, that is how the raven received its dark, dark coat. Now, in Africa, the owl is associated with dark magic. And if you see a large owl around a house, it indicates that there is a shaman that lives within that house. And the larger the owl, the more powerful the shaman, which I thought was interesting. Now, this is sad, but it did happen. It's part of history. In ancient Rome, it was thought that if you nailed an owl to your door or somewhere around the house, that it would keep baneful magic or negative energy out of the house. And the reason they felt that is that the owl was given credit for foretelling Julius Caesar's demise, which I think is an interesting story all in itself. So, I'm gonna end the owl section with this little poem. It was actually Sir Walter Scott that wrote this. And it says, birds of omen dark and foul, night crow, raven, bat, and owl, leave the sick man to his dreams. All night long he heard your scream. So these birds, though, known for being messengers between our world and the next. And so they are often equated with death or a god of death in some cultures. And what's really interesting is in our own Appalachian lore, it is thought that if you encounter a owl during the day, that death is coming. So, even we see a connection between the owl and its connection to the other world. And there was one other story that I thought was fascinating. This is an old English story, and it was said that if you would run around a tree that an owl set upon, that the owl would watch you as you ran around the tree, and then it would literally break its own neck because it would just keep watching you until it twisted up its neck enough to kill itself. I know it's kind of silly, isn't it? But
It, yeah, it's interesting all the kind of like omens and history of animals. I mean, we could make like even a part three, but we don't, we'll just talk a little bit about it because there's so much you could research and stuff. And like we talked about in the last episode, discovering that the word strega, which was like, I guess, Italian for witch, wasn't it? That actually meant screech owl. So I thought that was cool because screech owls are my favorite owls. And you have on an owl necklace you showed me too. I know we
oh,
can't
yes, I do.
show the
It's
camera, but
actually
you can
made
show.
out of black onyx,
Oh,
which is
awesome.
it's a beautiful, inexpensive stone, and it's so good for protection. It reflects like negative energy that is coming at you. It reflects it back to
Yeah,
whomever sent it to you. So
I
I really
love
do
that.
like. Mhm.
Yeah. So yeah, me and Pat, we just synchronized in our mind like we do sometimes about wearing our animal totems. We didn't even think about, we didn't separately like, hey, wear your animal totems today, but it worked out really well. So yeah, the animals are sacred to us, and we can learn a lot from them.
Well,
Um,
and they've been
yeah,
sacred to many, many people across time and the planet.
yeah, and how you're talking about, omens, like if you see a certain number of, there's like different little poems and stuff. Like if you see a certain number of crows, it can mean certain things, or if you see certain number of these birds flying in a certain direction, it mean, different things like that. So omens have been of animals is like a way to tell the future, predict things. Could be good or bad, it's not always bad. Omens aren't always bad. But so also, what's the way that you can find your totem power spirit animal, or, and connect with this animal medicine is go into meditation or try to do some dream work. And it could be just an animal that you really just connect with, an animal that you like. My niece, she really loves bears. And so that's her thing. I think we all have a certain animal that's our favorite, or a few animals. Like I said, I love cats as well as skunks and stuff too. And I also wanted to mention in Norse mythology, what I found out from our last episode is there's this thing called a philia. Is that's how you say it, right?
Oh,
Phil,
Filja.
Philja.
Remember?
That's it.
Filja.
Yeah.
Filja. Like Filja.
So that in Norse mythology, I believe, was it's an animal that you are is born as like it's born you're born with as it a spirit animal, I guess you would say, as your protector, and it's bound to your fortune and fate. And then when I learned that, it also made me think about the Harry Potter series with the Patronus. They would say expecto patronum, and their animal would come out of their wand. And that was to protect them from the Dementors, that would try to
Mhm.
suck their soul. But yeah, each character had their own different little animal, and I always thought
Mhm.
that was neat. And yeah, I think that's about all I was going to say.
On
That
that.
it,
Well, I would like to say that one of the things that if you have a common animal, like my grandmother's animal was the butterfly, and and she had butterflies everywhere. She had butterflies on her bathroom towel. She had butterflies on her dishware. She had butterflies everywhere. So it was really easy to tell whether Granny knew it or not that the butterfly was her animal.
Yeah,
And when she
exactly.
passed, yeah, when she passed, we went up on the mountain, as we call it. And you literally have to have GPS and, instructions on how to get there. It's that out in the Appalachian Mountains. But anyway, because over time, like the things that you knew, like the creek and the house on the left, and all of these things, they disappear, they change. And so you really, if you've got folk that you put up on the mountain, you need to have these GPS coordinates in order to return. So we put her up on the mountain, and when we came back down, Zia, I'd never seen anything like it. Millions, I swear, at least thousands. It was overwhelmed. My mind was blown. And
Awesome.
these butterflies lifted into the air. They were everywhere. So when my mother passed and we put her on the mountain, I came back down and I'm looking for the crow or the raven because that was her totem animal, right? Was really the crow. And so we were going out, and I swear I saw this huge flock, a murder of crows, land next to the creek that we were crossing. And I'm like, there it is. There it
Oh,
is. So,
yeah,
that can't happen, obviously, if the polar bear is your totem animal. But there is usually a representation of the animal world that is there
yeah,
for some reason. That has been my experience with my people.
yeah. My partner has been seeing a white hawk at his job, and then we see a hawk a lot of the time driving out of the holler here. So
What
that's one of his totem animals.
well, now that's one way to do it, right? Is that you see things. But what about you? How did you connect with the skunk? And what does that mean?
I just think they're really cute. They actually make good pets, I hear, but they're not legal here. But in I think Tennessee, they have like a festival and stuff. Um, they're just really resourceful. They scavenge for their food. They are actually really funny too. They protect their boundaries. They'll do that stomping stuff before to warn you that they're going to spray, but they won't use that resource of that spray unless they really have to. So but they're good at protecting themselves.
Well, well, I just looked this up because I
Yeah.
do not have an encyclopedic memory of what every animal means. But the skunk is often associated with self-awareness, introspection, boundaries, and self-respect.
hmm
I
Yeah,
like
very
that.
much boundaries. That makes a lot of sense, like how they act and everything. But I was gonna say my little familiar, my cat Rain, she likes to get over in the window here, and she was in the video earlier, but I don't know if she was noticeable. It's getting darker, but she'll go back and forth to get in that window and stuff. But we was gonna talk about some shapeshifters. So one of the things you'll hear a lot is a black cat with a white patch on its chest was actually a witch that shapeshifted into a cat too many times and then couldn't turn back because it was 9 times probably, because cats have 9 lives,
Mm-hmm.
they say. But the Bell Witch in Tennessee was said to be able to turn to a Black Panther. And then similarly, there's this episode of The Twilight Zone, and I think it's called Jess Bell or something, there might be more to that title, but Jess Bell. And so I feel like they might have took some reference, some ideas from the Bell Witch, but it's a Twilight Zone episode. It's actually set in Appalachia, so I consider that, going with the Southern Gothic genre that I always like. That's my brand, Great Southern Gothic. But so that left an impression on me. Y'all should definitely look that up. So there's like a witch this girl, she's in love with this boy, but he likes somebody else. And so she goes to this witch to get this guy to love her. But then I think I'm not sure, I can't remember the whole plot. You'll have to watch it. But anyway, she gets turned into a big black cat. Or, actually, it wasn't a Black Panther. It was like, just like maybe a jaguar, some kind of large wild cat. But I really liked that episode. But when we're talking about like skinwalkers, like that title, that name, that title, some people, I think get it confused with like what we would call a mimic, which is just something that is supernatural, some kind of paranormal thing that is like maybe a cryptid that could take on like someone that looks like you or your loved one and like fools you into thinking, coming towards them, going to them. But really, what a skinwalker is said to be from the Navajo tribe is essentially an evil person that wanted power and be able to transform into different animals or different shapes, and they had to sacrifice someone that they were close to, the loved one, in order to gain this power. So obviously that was a very evil thing, but it's just a very interesting concept.
Yeah. Well, we've had that concept around, I mean, with this whole idea of the werewolf and, changing from man into a wolf. And of course, with
Yeah, that
Skinwalker,
too.
it's Navajo, Apache, Hopi, and Pueblo, and several others. I mean, this was a
Yeah.
widespread idea, if you will, of a man wearing, and here's the question, is it a man wearing an animal, or is it the animal wearing the man?
Yeah. And then, when you think about like throughout time, like the pagan gods, they were very animalistic. They had horns, the horn gods and stuff, and then that kind of became how Satan was portrayed as having horns, because of, I think probably because of that. But it's kind of just our animalistic nature as humans, because we are animals, human animals, but yeah, obviously on a different level. But we can connect with animals spiritually and even telepathically, I think.
Well, and the interesting thing about the skinwalker, I don't want to call it a myth because, there are certainly people that believe in this and may have experienced something to do with this. So, but it really pops up all over the world. I mean, everywhere from the Philippines to Japan to, to Italy to, I mean, there's this idea of being able to take the form of another creature in order to wreak havoc. I mean, very few of these are friendly, if you get my drift. I mean, they are there. I mean, this is one, it's called the Bakiniko, and it is Japanese in Japanese folklore. Well, the reason I like this one is that they can raise the dead, make their owners dance against their will, feast on corpses, hurl fireballs. I mean, possess people. I mean, these are very powerful beings and were very much feared in every culture that they appear in. And one of the most common forms that they take is the form of the wolf. And let me just talk about the wolf real quick. The wolf in Celtic lore, the Morrigan herself, and if you know anything about the Morrigan, she was the goddess that would show up on the battlefield, and with her would be the crows because they would start to pick apart the bodies, right? She was very feared, a very formidable battle goddess. And the Morrigan herself was seen to have taken the form of the wolf. So she was a shapeshifter, in their idea. And then in Scotland, the Kalia, which it looks like Kalich, but it's Kalia. Uh, she's shown as an old woman that brings destruction and winter, right? I mean, she too is formidable, and she is shown riding or known to be riding a galloping wolf as she holds a hammer and she holds a wand, and the wand is made of human flesh. I mean, that to me is pretty formidable. In Native American culture, the Lakota, a woman was injured, I mean, to the point of death, and she was adopted by a wolf pack. And so she spent time with the wolves and she learned from them and gained some of their magic. And when she went back home to her own tribe, then she was able to detect whether people were coming long before the other humans could. So she took that magic, if you will, that ability with her when she went back home. And then the Cherokee talk about the dog and the wolf. The dog and the wolf shared a fire for a long time. Well, one day the dog ran the wolf off, and the wolf left and went into the forest. And he said, "Hey, I kind of like it here. I'm just going to stay here, right?" And so the dog stayed with the humans. Well, the humans decided to go and kill the wolf. And the cousins and brothers of the wolf came and at that point decimated the humans. But there were always survivors, and the dog from then on walked with the humans. So it's a beautiful story about how dogs came to be domesticated and a very important part of their tribe. And then, of course, we have the whole idea of wolf as mother with Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome, of the Holy Roman Empire. That's a powerful vision. Of course, Romulus and Remus were they were twins. So every year there is a special festival in Rome, and it celebrates this whole idea of Romulus and Remus having been protected and raised by the wolf, which says that, of course, Rome was founded by wolves. I mean, to me, it's just fascinating. And then you mentioned Fenrir, and Fenrir was a fierce wolf in Norse mythology. And he was always up to something. He was just a mischievous wolf. And for me to say mischievous, if he ate a couple of villages, oh well. I mean, this is God level stuff. So let me say though, he caught the attention of the gods, and they said, all right, Fenrir, you cannot do this anymore. So the dwarves came up and the trolls, and they said, okay, we've got this magic ribbon because nothing could contain Fenrir. And they said, all we have to do is wrap this around his paws. And Fenrir was not a stupid wolf, and he said, the only way I'll do this if someone is brave enough to put their hand in my mouth. And so Tyr, the god Tyr did. And so when he did, they wrapped him because I'm thinking that Fenrir thought he could escape, but when he saw he could not, he bit down on the hand, and so the god became a one-handed god. In fact, one of the names for him, he is known as the leavings of the wolf. So the wolf has such a rich heritage in so many different cultures.
Yeah, I know that's a big, totem animal. Like in the Cherokee, they have the wolf tribe, and or not tribe, but clan, and then they've got Panther clan too, or blue paint, I think is the other name for them. But oh, you said the Japanese thing. It was something neko, and neko meant cat, right? And so one thing that I read that's what I was going to bring up was that cat. They thought like every cat was a witch or something like that. That they they just were cats were witches, and that kind of goes back to our original thing. Always, witches and cats together and everything. And then also remembered, Rhiannon, that song that, that's a Welsh witch legend, but that song by Fleetwood Mac as well. And we talked about it before, I think. I don't know if we talked about it on the last episode or not, but how she shapeshifted into a horse. And,
Uh, what you were talking about, it's a Bakaniko. Beware the malevolent shapeshifter already living in your home. In
yeah,
Japanese
yeah,
folklore, the Bakaniko is an ordinary house cat.
yeah,
So,
but they love cats. The cat culture is big in Japan. They have the maneki neck, however, the lucky cat that they wave like that to bring in prosperity and stuff. So. Also, the thing about witches transforming into animals and how she, Rhiannon, transformed into a horse. Uh, there was a common thing too, is that witches would turn people into animals. They could transform other people into animals, into a frog, or yeah, I've heard a horse, and that they would ride the person. And that was something that was featured on that new Hellboy movie that was set in Appalachia that I thought was pretty cool.
I just want to mention too, because somebody might want to know that Rhiannon was turned into a horse as punishment after the loss of her son. She
Yeah,
had to carry visitors to the royal court on her back, symbolizing her transformation. Isn't that sad?
yeah,
She,
and it's
of
a
course,
weird story. You definitely need to look into it. It's a
well,
weird
she
story.
was, yeah, well, obviously she was a horse goddess, having
Mhm.
transformed into a horse. But we have so much to go over, and unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank, of course, Zia, who's such a delight. She really is. In fact, I want to mention that our Miss Zia just had a birthday. So if you want, tell her happy birthday down in the comments. We love
Thank
our
you.
Zia. And she is, of course, the owner of Great Southern Gothic. It is a beautiful little store. It's upstairs in a really old building, which always adds that coolness factor. And in West Jefferson, North Carolina. So look her up. It's greatsoutherngothic.com. And we're going to end before we actually leave tonight. I am working on a documentary and I want to share the first promo that I have for that. I hope you stick around for it. It's only 2 minutes long. So it is about Appalachian granny women. It's called There's Magic in the Mountains. And we call them the Appalachian Granny Witches of Appalachia now, which is a far cry from the way that they, of course, considered themselves. They were very pious women, but they certainly had gifts. So, with that, I'm going to share this with you.
Granny witch is just someone, like they'll often call them water witches because they do dowsing. They're usually healers, midwives, tend to sick animals and cursed animals, and take the curse off your flower bed so it produces sunflowers this year when it didn't last year. That sort of thing. Keep your neighbors at bay if they're causing you trouble and drama. So it was just someone who helped the community with, healing and magical needs.
My mom was like to my right, and in my peripheral, I catch her doing this number. And I'm eyeballing sideways, and I'm like, no, what story were you talking about? And mom's doing this number. And she said, she was a witch. I was like, really? So coming home from the funeral, I asked my mom, I said, explain to me how I never knew anything about Belle like that. She said, because I know you, and I know that would make you focus on her more. I said, well, tell me some stories. Now that the cat's out of the bag, what was the deal about Belle that everybody said she was a witch? I said, was it the healing part that everybody just thought she was magic, or what? And she said, no. She said, in whatever it was, 20s or 30s, Belle had actually sent off and ordered some kind of book to do witchcraft. And I said, in Logan County, West Virginia, she found the ability to send off for a book on that in the 20s and 30s.
Pat, it
All
looks
right.
so good. That looks really good. It's exciting. It's going to be a really good documentary, and I'm excited to be a part of that as well.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I'm getting excited about it. Unfortunately, I wanted to have it done by this fall and found out I was having some health issues and we have to heal ourselves first and take care of ourselves, right? So I had to step back from that, but fully expect it to be ready to roll next fall and I'm excited about it. Just finished, I've got one more interview I want to do and just finished really the last interview. This one's kind of a bonus that I'm doing and I just want to pick this person up are so interesting. So we've got several people, and the whole purpose of this documentary is to preserve the history of our granny women who, their memories. I mean, with me, it was my mother and grandmother, and we're losing those memories. And I love it that we have young folks like you and others that are taking the mantle, right? And keeping this beautiful magic that we have in these mountains alive. And from our mountain in the Appalachians, we are going to say adieu from Zeea and I. We hope that you have a wonderful week and stay
Stay curious.
curious.